Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the off-season Notre Dame football YouTube show from Inside ND Sports. I've got a secret for you. It's actually going to be our in-season football show as well. We called it Monday Night Live last year. We like Football Never Sleeps better. We're still going to jump around a little bit during training camp just to bring you the freshest news, the hottest angles, and so forth. Then once we get to the season, we will go every Monday night. As always, we will include you in our conversation if you ask us questions, and they're wonderful questions, or you give us great compliments. Don't forget to ring the subscription bell. Ring the notification bell. I wish you could get the subscriptions that way, but we'd also like you to subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you better content. You can also, the subscription bell helps you know when we have new videos, not just Football Never Sleeps. We had a lot of practice footage video from today that Charleston Bowles took. And we've got lots to talk about tonight. Tyler will probably do most of the talking. I'll just sit here and look pretty, and we'll move forward with our topics. But Tyler, do you want to let them know how to ask questions?
Yeah, if you are new to the YouTube world, make sure that you learn how to submit the questions. First off, if you're watching us embedded somewhere, whether it's on our message board or on our website, make sure that you click through to YouTube to either get onto the YouTube website or the YouTube app, and that will give you the option to send a comment or question to us. If you are on a desktop, that comment box should be to the right-hand side of the video and our talking heads. And if you're on a mobile device, of some sort, that comment box should be below us. So feel free to send in questions, say hello. We like to know who's checking in on us, even if you don't have something that you necessarily want to ask, because we certainly have plenty of topics to discuss today, given that we have actual football to talk about, with seeing Notre Dame's first football practice of the preseason camp and getting to talk to Marcus Freeman afterwards.
Okay, we're going to start with what mattered most for Marcus Freeman's press conference. So Notre Dame had their first training camp practice. We got to watch the whole thing. Then we went and sat around for a little bit, waited for Marcus to come over. We sat in air conditioning, so it was nice. Once practice was over, asked him questions. And I think what a lot of people are really, I believe the most important thing right now is how Notre Dame moves beyond Matt Balis. But there were some dangling details about, why there was such a sudden resignation right before training camp was supposed to start. So, Tyler, why don't we start there?
Yeah, certainly caught me by surprise as I was working yesterday and preparing to get ready for what I wanted to write about heading into the camp. And, well, that gave me something to write about. Matt Balis, his resignation was not only a surprise to us, but a surprise to Marcus Freeman, who received the call from Bayless on, was it Saturday or Sunday?
It was Sunday night, and then they had a face-to-face meeting Monday where Marcus tried to talk him out of it.
Yeah, as you can imagine, being so close to the season and the good work that Matt Balis has done for Notre Dame's football program since he was hired. After the 2016 season, a big part of the sort of revamping of the football program. After that 4-8 dreadful season by Brian Kelly, and Matt Balis put Notre Dame in a tough spot going into the season, and as a result, has promoted Fred Hale to the interim role. Fred Hale had served as a strength coach at Eastern Michigan before coming to Notre Dame a couple years ago. And so has some experience at Notre Dame, and then experience in a similar role as well, which gave Marcus Freeman the confidence to put him in the Bayless role. And certainly you get to see him right away when we walk into practice, and see him leading the warm-up drills and getting the guys ready to go for the first practice of the preseason. But I think it was interesting to hear that it was surprising to Marcus Freeman that this wasn't something that he knew about. He said he had no idea that this was coming. And Matt Balis sort of explained that he felt like he couldn't give everything that he needed to give to the program due to some personal matters, which he did not.
He didn't even tell Marcus.
The way Marcus presented it to us is that Marcus doesn't necessarily have all the details of what's going on in Matt Balis' personal life that makes him feel like he can't give everything that he needs to the program. As I was reaching out to people yesterday to try to get some explanation and insight to what was going on, and that seemed to check out with at least the perspective of people I was talking to, that Matt Balis is the kind of guy that if he's going to be in on something, he's going to be all in. And if he feels he can't be fully invested in the program for whatever reason, then he feels like someone else should be able to do the job. Obviously, he knows Fred Hale probably has some confidence that he can do that job in his stead. So I think that is where Notre Dame has ended up now. And I think we'll see what sort of comes of that in the long run. Marcus Freeman did say that Fred Hale would be considered for the permanent role, but they will, I imagine, consider plenty of other options as well,
right,
when there's a better time to do that. But with practice getting started, Notre Dame needed to have a plan in place, and this is the one that Marcus Freeman opted to go to.
Matt Balis' fingerprints and his soul were all over this program. Back in the summer of 2017, I spent a day with Brian Kelly, and so that was about 5 or 6 months after Matt had been hired, and Brian Kelly was in the midst of his kind of reinvention as a coach, where he was, a little bit on thin ice after the 4-8 season. And it was interesting because the first place we went to explain that reinvention was to Matt Balis' office. And Brian took me around and said, here's what we're doing differently in our weight program and in our strength program. But it wasn't just that. Matt brought all these ideas about SWAT teams, their off-season training teams where they teach leadership and accountability, and you get points for what you do in the weight room and the classroom and everything else. And it really changed the culture of Notre Dame football. And it was interesting because Brian Kelly was Matt Balis' boss, but Brian was asking in front of me, Matt, questions. Can we do this day? Can we, he wanted to work around Matt Balis' schedule in the summer. So he was a really, really important part of it. And I do believe when I asked Marcus Freeman about that today, that the Marcus Freeman culture and the Matt Balis culture really are one. But you still need a person that's a curator of that culture in the off season. They are the contact in the off season. They are the face of the program for these players in the off season. Right. And that's a very important role. So I think Fred Hale certainly deserves to show whether he can handle that role at this point in his career, or Notre Dame needs to open it up and get the best person that they can find. But certainly that director of football performance has been transformative in the way Notre Dame players act and play. I would say Mike McGlinchey may be the best example of it. He said before Matt Balis got there, he could do 8 reps at 225 on the bench. Mike McGlinchey, a future first-round draft choice at that time.
Yeah.
And when he left, it was 22. Now, that's great for a guy that's 6'8" and has long arms. It's if you're short and squatty, it's easier to do those benches. But really an interesting story, an interesting storyline, and I think Marcus handled it well in his philosophy. Do you want to talk about what he said to his team about how they move forward with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like dealing with adversity and sort of using this as an opportunity to grow and figure out how to attack the season. I think sort of like what you said to the fact that, hey, the culture that Matt Balis instilled is the same culture that I want in this program. So this is our culture. It's not necessarily Matt Balis's culture. And so he gathered the guys up before practice started today, and sort of, hey, said, calm down. I know everyone's fired up. Let's get things rolling, and we have jobs to do, and everything's going to be perfect. But we're going to go out there and give our best and learn from those opportunities. And so I think certainly it's strange timing. And if guys were blindsided by this, I think you can think about, well, is this some kind of distraction? But I think at the end of the day, the kids know what they have to do. And whether or not Matt Balis is here or not, they have to go out there and prove themselves and get ready for a season that is a month away and something that they've been working all off season with Matt Balis to be prepared for. So I think that this is it's certainly a loss to the program, but I don't think it has to be a loss for Notre Dame in the immediate coming days and weeks and months because of everything they've done to get to this moment.
Right. The thing that I liked best about what Marcus Freeman said to his team was change is inevitable. And this isn't going to be the only change. And we don't know when the next one's going to come.
Right.
And I think if you prepare them that, yeah, this is part of our character, this is part of our culture, that we're going to be able to overcome things, that, yeah, we're going to get curveballs and we need to handle them. And so let's not get thrown when we get one. Not that this is a little one, but if you think about the really good teams Notre Dame has had in recent years, 2012, 2018, and 2020, they all had this kind of stuff. 2012 especially, I mean, they lost a huge cornerback recruit right at the 11th hour. What was that kid's name that was from the East Coast that did the interview with his helmet on? Anyways, he was a high four-star guy that ended up going to Florida State. It'll hit me in a minute.
Ronald Darby.
Ronald Darby, exactly. And
that was before I was all the way on board, so it took me a while to remember that.
And then T. Shepard was a really good cornerback prospect that they got, early enrollee. And then just before spring practice starts, the NCAA clearinghouse says, we found some stuff that makes him ineligible, so he's off your team. And then they had cornerbacks right and left getting injured to the point that 6 weeks before they started the season, running back Kavari Russell, who hadn't played cornerback in high school, they said, we need you to switch positions and we need you to start for us and be good. And it was that kind of season for them, but they overcame a lot. The 2018 team overcame a lot. They changed quarterbacks in midstream. The 2020 team had to deal with all the crazy COVID stuff, game cancellations. Notre Dame, if you remember, had an outbreak where they had to move the Wake Forest game and they didn't get a chance to play against Sam Hartman. And then the Wake Forest game got canceled later. So, I mean, all those crazy things. So I really thought that was a good approach to dealing with this adversity. Now, maybe one of the reasons why Marcus Freeman is confident that they can deal with adversity is if you saw at the first practice the cornerback group that they had on the field today, I was like, okay, this is potentially as good. I mean, is this Shane Walton, Vontez Duff kind of good? And if you don't know who those people are, they played 21 years ago at Notre Dame, with one of them being a first-team All-American and another one being a third-team All-American. So, Tyler, I know that they impressed you. What did you see that you liked from that group today in practice?
Yeah, before I get to the cornerbacks, when you brought up the 2012 team, I thought it was I think it's a kind of an interesting parallel. Now, obviously, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're saying this team is going to go to the playoff or whatever. But
well, I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying the good ones.
No. Yeah, and I'm not saying you are, but I think whenever you talk about that, I think you sort of put those sort of expectations on the team. But in that 2012 team, the leaders on that team had gone through a coaching change, and so you would think, this team as well, the leaders on this team have gone through a coaching change. They've been through plenty of turnover and unexpected news with Brian Kelly leaving the program, Tommy Reese leaving the program. This isn't anything new for the guys that are at the head of this program. Now, obviously, there's going to be guys that take, for instance, the freshman that came in this summer and worked with Matt Balis all summer long. Are like, okay, they really bought into him, and then all of a sudden he's gone. That can be a bit of shock. But I think there's certainly some leadership at the top of this program that I think they can help them sort of maneuver through this because they've gone through these kinds of things before.
Right. And one of the other things that happened in that offseason was Urban Meyer came back to Ohio State, and he poached a couple of Brian Kelly's assistants. I mean, just took his milk money.
Yeah.
And one of those was Ed Warner, the offensive line coach. Well, guess who Brian Kelly hired to replace him? Harry Heastand.
Yeah.
So it turned out okay.
So maybe Matt Balis' replacement will be the next Harry Heastand. But
There you go.
that cornerback group that you mentioned was something that certainly caught my eye today. Obviously, Benjamin Morrison, with the expectations of coming back from being a freshman All-American, is someone that we expected to look good, and he picked up right where he left off last season with some pass breakups and an interception, particularly against some of Notre Dame's best wide receivers. And then in addition to that, Cam Hart finally healthy after a long recovery from a shoulder issue that had nagged him into last season and ended his season last year. Can he get back to sort of that being on the cusp of being an NFL player? I think he's certainly motivated to do that, and still has that skill set and those tools that would lead you to believe that he could get there if he stays healthy. I thought he looked good. There was one rep where he just sort of put Rico Flores on the ground when he jammed him at the line of scrimmage. I thought that was pretty funny. And then Jaden Mickey had a really great practice. He had a couple of interceptions. Doesn't need an excuse to talk, but that only gave him more reason to talk because he likes to chirp during practice. He did give up some catches as well, including a really nice touchdown catch by Braylon James in the end zone, which sort of jumped over him. And as the kids would say, Braylon James sort of mossed Jaden Mickey. But I thought the cornerback group looked good. And then when you're talking about Clarence Lewis, Christian Gray, Chance Tucker as your potential fourth cornerback, that puts Notre Dame in a really good spot going into the season if everything sort of unfolds the way it looks like it's unfolding right now.
Yeah, it was impressive to say the least. Cam Hart, so I'm at the beginning, in the very first period after they stretch, they have this ball security drill where the defensive backs are trying to knock the ball out of the wide receiver's hands and the running back's hands and stuff. And I'm looking at number 5 in white jersey, banging it against a wide receiver. And I go, what's Tobias Merriweather doing in white jersey? That's how tall Cam Hart is. I mean, just about. I mean, he's 6'3". Tobias is 6'4". He's got long arms. I mean, if he's healthy, there's not a lot of cornerbacks in college that are that tall, that long, and have that kind of speed. So I'm really interested to see. He told me in the spring that he was going to be an All-American and a first-round draft pick, and at the time I kind of went, okay. And but today I thought, well, maybe he has that chance. I mean, he certainly has the tools to be. So we'll see. But yeah, that was kind of an exciting part of the first day of camp. And again, keep in mind the lens we're looking through is no pads yet, not full pads yet. There was even a period where half the team didn't have their helmets on. So we're not seeing the physicality necessarily in all the periods, but we are seeing the speed and the movement, which is helpful to look at. So let's move on to why I almost said Brian Kelly. Why Marcus Freeman? But Brian Kelly would be impressed by Jeremiah Love and Micah Bell as well.
Yeah, it goes back to that speed that you were talking about. The speed that those guys showed in the summer really impressed Marcus Freeman. He was very effusive talking about Jeremiah Love, saying that kid can fly. He can really fly out there on the field. And so now for him, it's about seeing those guys translate that speed to the game field, to the practice field, and putting those guys in situations where they're not hesitant so that speed can come out and so that they understand what they need to be doing, let that speed take over and not slow themselves down by processing something that certainly needs to be processed, but allowing them to process faster so that speed can come into play. And I thought Jeremiah Love looked really good. You could see some of that speed when they're giving him the ball on some sort of outside runs, and he'd get to the hole pretty quick. And Micah Bell, I didn't see him necessarily do a ton specifically in practice, but we certainly know that speed exists within him, and he's sort of in that deep cornerback room that we just got done talking about. What were you surprised that those were the two guys that Marcus Freeman highlighted when you asked him about the newcomers?
Jeremiah Love, not so much. I was curious about Micah because, I knew he was a track guy, just didn't know, again, if he looked lost, in some of the things they had done this summer, and obviously not. I thought he might add a couple of other players. I was and I think if I had more than one follow-up questions, I would have pressed him on it. But I would say, Brendan Vernon looked the part out there other than the number 17, which can't remember if it was you or Tim O'Malley. Okay, that was bothered by the number 17. And then Boubacar Traore. Again, some of those freshman defensive linemen, Traore was trimmer, leaner than I expected, but I like the way that he moved. Armel Mucum was huge. I mean, he's got to be an inside guy. There's no way he's playing end at 280.
No.
I mean, I'm going to finish amending the depth chart after we get done with the show. He's not going to be in the Viper end group any longer.
No.
But yeah, I wondered if he would bring up the junior college guys. There were 3 of them that came in June: the kicker, Spencer Schrader, Antonio Carter II, the second, and Devin Ford. And again, Devin Ford, he looks the part. I didn't watch Antonio as much. Did you?
Not as much. I was looking for him, but I didn't see him do as much. And it wasn't that he did something wrong or poorly, but I don't think he was put in a lot of, high leverage situations or instances where you needed to make plays.
Right. I mean, there are guys that certainly, but I specifically asked him about the June arrivals, not people that were coming off injuries or people that improved a lot over the summer. And there were a bunch of those kind of players as well. So we're going through what mattered most from Marcus Freeman's press conference. The next thing that we want to hit is the plan to prepare more linebackers to make an impact. So what's that all about, Tyler?
Yeah, I think we're all curious of what Notre Dame's linebacker combinations will look like this season, not just who's out there, but in which positions they're playing. Besides J.D. Bertrand, we think there's a lot of flexibility possible with those guys. And Marcus Freeman has sort of challenged Al Golden to make sure that he gets more reps for those young guys, to get them in positions that they can use them in different combinations, create roles for them, but to give them a lot of reps in practice so they can find out if those guys can handle those assignments and figure out in which ways are the best to use them. So I think that was pretty interesting. We saw a little bit of it today. I mean, it's hard to track it there's just so many guys moving in and out, but I think that's exactly what Marcus Freeman wants to see. He wants to see all those guys getting different reps and who's lining up next to who, and figure that all out later, but get those guys out there and let them get on the field and try to make some plays and be in a position to make decisions and know the different responsibilities that will be put on them within the defense.
Even in the older group, in the Kaiser, Leofau, J.D. Bertrand group, I liked the fact that Kaiser was playing a lot of will today. It looks like they're going to flip-flop those roles, that Maris Leofau would be the rover, but I think they would use him in a lot of different ways than the traditional rover. And then Kaiser would be the inside linebacker. And I like that better because I think Kaiser's stronger with the run fits. Maybe not as good in coverage as Leofau is, but I think a better blitzer. Yep. I think they'll just get more production out of that spot with Jack Kaiser there. So that was one of the things that I liked. So the last part of this category is the lack of injured players. So I didn't even ask about injuries. I let somebody else ask about
that was
injuries.
Me. Yeah. I asked about KK Smith. I was like, what the heck, Eric? Now I got to do this? No, I was kidding. But I always have it on my list, and I usually if I'm asking after you, I usually don't have to ask about the injuries because you usually hit them. But KK Smith was the only injured player sitting out today. KK Smith is a freshman wide receiver who you may also know as Caleb Smith, but to avoid confusion. And I think the nickname that he went by at home, he goes by KK Smith. So I think that's what he will be known as moving forward. But he was out with a left shoulder injury. Marcus Freeman said he had surgery this summer. He wasn't exactly sure on the timeline of his return. He said he'd be out for a couple months. Sounds like that KK Smith will almost certainly redshirt his freshman season, which isn't the worst thing and probably would have happened if he was healthy, quite frankly, with the other guys that were here before him and those guys showing pretty well in the spring. So that was the only injury news we had so far. Now that practice is getting underway, I'm sure, knock on wood for Notre Dame fans, that more will be to come. That's just the nature of college football, but a pretty healthy showing for Notre Dame coming out of the gate into preseason camp, and the one injury seemingly being at a position where they can handle it. Although we have a question here from Frank Sarah that is more concerned about it than perhaps you or I are. Well, I'll get your opinion on it here in a second. Frank Sarah asks, my concern is about wide receiver depth getting greater with the KK Smith injury. Should ND try to get another wide receiver?
Well, I guess technically you could get a grad transfer if they're still sitting in the portal at this point, but with
you think they're real talented if they're in the portal on July 26th?
Yeah, if they're still in the portal, they're probably cooked. So it's kind of like that last piece of pizza that got left out overnight, you know.
You feed that to Carter Carls.
Here's why I don't share your concern, Frank. I think it's a good question because there are running backs that can line up at those receiver positions.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah Love could help you at wide receiver. I think Jabron Payne, certainly Devin Ford. You could really, Jadarian Price, really any of those guys could help you there as long as you stay healthy at running back. And then you look at, again, KK Smith was not a guy that probably would have played over the 4-game redshirt limit.
Right.
So I think from KK's standpoint, it's a downer because, all these other freshmen are flashing and they're looking great. And you're from Texas and it's a long way to Notre Dame and you're sitting there with a sling on your left shoulder and that's no fun. But I think once he gets healthy and can get worked into things, I know they like his speed. So, but yeah, I think right now I feel pretty comfortable. But yeah, it would be interesting if at some point you could do the transfer portal during the season or make trades. I guess if they classified players as employees, maybe you could trade people.
Yeah, I don't think it's that big of a concern now. I think it becomes more of a concern if you have a couple more. If you have a couple more injuries, and then Notre Dame gets to a spot where it's in trouble with the wide receiver depth. But your running back point is important. I think Notre Dame's going to use those guys as pass catchers to begin with, and then if you need them to line up outside every once in a while, I think that they have some guys that are capable of that as well. And speaking of Carter Carls, who I mentioned because of his love for cold pizza. We have a question here from who I'm assuming is our buddy Matt Freeman with Irish Sports Daily, asking about Texas A&M, probably inspired by Carter Carls, our former coworker at the South Bend Tribune, who covers Texas A&M for 24/7 Sports and is a Texas A&M grad. The question is, will Texas A&M finish with more than 8 wins this season?
I'm going to look at their football schedule before I automatically say no.
You're giving him more benefit of the doubt than me. I would say no just to make Carter mad.
Let's see. New Mexico, that's a win. At Miami, I'll say that's a loss. Louisiana, I think they'll handle them 2-1. Auburn, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. I don't know who the heck ACU is. LSU. I don't see 8 wins there. I see the Papa John's pizza of football teams.
All right. Sorry to break the news to you, Carter, but you got some losses headed your way. All right.
Seriously, though.
3-9, says Matt.
the the whole the whole dynamic of the Bobby Petrino thing and Jimbo just being so guarded with what he says about that, and just the potentially explosive chemistry of those two working together. I mean, maybe it works out, but I don't know that, Jimbo really wanted to give up play calling. I think he was kind of coaxed into doing that. So I don't know.
I appreciate Matt sending that 3-9 comment, because now we can screenshot it and put it out on Twitter and make people think that's their prediction for Notre Dame season, and then really get people mad at Irish Sports Daily.
Well, and I like the "We Are Not Marshall" here. That may be the best handle that we've had on in our show.
Yeah, We Are Not Marshall said the Sleeper podcast that I get to watch once every 6 months. So thank you for making your semi-annual return to the Football Never Sleeps show. We appreciate it, and some well wishes from We Are Not Marshall, Eric Hopal as well. Really appreciate your article, sir. Busy summer, and I am now locked and loaded for ND football.
That's great. And again, don't wait 6 months to watch us. We'll be on weekly now through the season. We're just going to move around on days of the week. But once we get to the start of the season, it'll be Monday nights. Every Monday night, we'll be on before Monday Night Football, so we won't intrude into that. But if you watch The Voice, maybe then that'll be a problem.
Well, we already got to the friends portion of the show with Matt Freeman. Now we got to the family portion of the show with my father chiming in. How did the Big Uglies look? Too much talk of the unimportant positions. We all know where the games are won. And for those who don't know, my dad is a longtime offensive line coach at the high school level. Dad, today was the first day of practice. The Big Uglies didn't do anything that was that important. They aren't wearing pads. Who cares what linemen are doing in pads? And you know that I would be Eric loves talking about line play as much as we do.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a lot to look at today necessarily. Although whenever I had to get a chance to, I looked down there, and I guess we could say that the all important guard positions, which are up for grabs, taking the number 1 reps today. At left guard was Billy Schrouth, and at right guard was Andrew Kristofic. So too soon to say how that's going to play out, but I think those are the leading candidates to be the starters come the end of the.
I'm putting Billy Schrouth in ink. I'm pushing my chips in there. I think Rocco Spindler's got some fight into him, so I think that right guard position will be interesting.
All right, and let's go to this question from We Are Not Marshall. Biggest surprise unit at the end of the season?
Okay, so we would be looking at candidates that aren't being touted. So I would say we're looking at the tight ends, the wide receivers to a certain extent because of their youth, and the defensive line and maybe the safeties. So I think
for the Notre Dame fan base, you could probably say linebacker too. I don't think that they get sort of the respect that maybe.
Okay. So of those 5, who would be the biggest surprise at the end of the season? I would say the linebackers. I think they're going to have a really good year. The way that they're mixing and matching there, I love the potential of the wide receivers. I'm not surprised by them. If the defensive line is elite, and I'm not rolling that out, that'll be a bigger surprise. But I will say, given what I feel confident pushing chips in on, and not potato chips, betting chips, I would say the linebackers.
Well, we normally bet potato chips here, so those are all the same. You're welcome for including linebackers to give you the easy answer there, but I think I don't know. I feel like I would go with wide receivers. That feels a little bit like a cop out because I feel like there's a lot of buzz about the wide receivers, but they haven't proven anything yet. So I would go to wide receivers. I think Jaden Thomas is going to have a great season. I think Tobias Merriweather is going to make the impact that people are expecting of him. I like what Chris Tyree's doing. I think certainly Jaden Greathouse can get in the mix there. Deion Colsey. Yep. I think there's a lot of potential there, especially with the way Sam Hartman plays. That can really maximize that position, which because of Sam Hartman, it seems sort of like a cop-out. It's like, well, of course, Sam Hartman's going to make the wide receivers better, but they have to go out there and still make the plays. And I think that they will by the end of the season, and people will be pretty impressed by the work that Chancey Stuckey's group has done.
Okay, are we out of questions for a while?
We are out of questions. Let's get to what mattered most from what we observed at practice today.
Okay, where do you want to start with that? Because some of it's a little overlapping from.
Yeah, we talked about cornerbacks, so let's start with running backs. That's something that I wrote a bit about, the running back depth. I think we all know and expect big things from Audric Estime, but once Logan Diggs left after the spring, it sort of left a hole there in the depth chart of, okay, who's going to step up and will Notre Dame be okay? There's talent there, but will those guys either be healthy or ready to produce and experienced enough to produce? I was very impressed coming out of the first practice. Now it's just one practice, but usually the running backs don't really impress me in practice settings like today, where there's not pads on, there's not a lot of stuff that they can do that's like the equivalent of what they'll be asked to do on game days. But just sort of the speed that those guys showed, the recognition to find holes, I thought was a good, at least first look at the depth there. We talked about Jeremiah Love, the speed that he showed. Devin Ford made some nice cuts. I think Jabron Payne has exceeded my expectations to this point of what he can be. Had a good spring, but I think he continued to show that today. And some of it was as a pass catcher, like you mentioned, as him being a possibility to fill in for a wide receiver. So I think there's some good depth there at the running back position, and that was something that really stood out to me today.
I agree. I think running back is going to be a plus. Again, Logan Diggs was a really good running back, and you knew what you were going to get from him. These guys don't have the experience of proving it under the bright lights on the big stage, but there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of speed there. Devin Ford looks fast. And, that was a top 40 recruit nationally coming out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
And when you got that pedigree, there's always a chance that you can kind of rekindle that. So we'll see if that happens. Now, he's not going to be the starter,
right,
but he certainly can be an important piece. And they were looking at him at special teams as well. Another thing that you observed at practice was Steve Angeli getting ready for the QB2 role. So what did you see from Steve Angeli today?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I think it's the best I've seen Steve Angeli play since we've been able to watch him as a Notre Dame football player. Certainly, he had sort of his moment in the sun in the blue gold game as an early enrolled freshman, but that was against mostly walk-ons at the end of the game there
in the 2022 blue gold game.
Yeah, in the 2022 when he was a freshman, so to see him go out there, make some nice throws, make some big time throws. I thought there was one particularly
nice run too.
Yeah, he made a nice run. He sort of I hesitate to say outran because maybe Jalen Sneed didn't quite see him, but he outran Jalen Sneed on the corner and sort of got the edge, turning the corner up to the side that Jalen Sneed was on, and got some yards there. Made a nice throw into the end zone to Rico Flores Jr. with sort of like three defenders, so I thought all maybe had a chance to make a play on the ball, but no one was able to get to it. Threw up a nice pass to Braylon James. I mentioned earlier, I believe, that Jaden Mickey sort of was on the losing end of, and he made some mistakes. Certainly, he threw a couple picks, got some balls deflected, made some bad decisions, but I thought there was more upside in Steve Angeli's game today than I had seen previously. I'm curious if you share the same opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there were, it's 18-10, and at a couple times I thought it was Hartman. And then I went, oh, wow, that was Steve Angeli that threw that. I still wouldn't rule out Kenny Minchie from trying to make a move.
Mm-hmm.
But based on today, and Marcus Freeman talked about it in the press conference, one thing that Steve Angeli has done is hang out with Sam Hartman. I know when I had a one-on-one with Sam Hartman earlier this summer, and we're going to have that story coming up in the next week, he was, Steve Angeli wanted to go fishing with him. So he was going to take him fishing. And I think he's learning a lot of good habits. This is one of the reasons why I thought, Tyler Buckner, it wouldn't have been a bad idea for him to stick around and be around Sam Hartman for a whole year and then have the inside track to being the starter at Notre Dame in 2024. He chose a different option, but I do think Sam Hartman is rubbing off on these younger quarterbacks, and Marcus Freeman said as much. So from practice today, Chris Tyree is a wide receiver. Now, I didn't realize that was so much up for grabs in some people's minds, but he certainly looked the part today, and it seemed like Marcus Freeman was touting him as well.
Yeah, it wasn't so much that it was up for grabs. I think certainly when you look at the depth that we talked about at running back, it makes it less likely that they need him to move back to running back. But I just thought he looked we've seen of him at wide receiver today. I thought he looked really natural out there. He made some nice catches, outran Thomas Harper on a crossing route, and Sam Hartman was patient enough to find him and make a big play out of it. So I think he's potentially the starting slot receiver for Notre Dame, and I think we maybe forget about that because he was a running back less than a year ago. But I think he's really sort of come on. Marcus Freeman said something about him catching like 18,000 passes over the summer.
Yeah.
I think
I want to know who counted those.
Well, I know they've been using this new machine, and I can't think of the name of the company.
Matt Freeman doesn't.
I imagine that that sort of tracks that. And the way this machine works, as I understand it, you can like program it to like exactly where you want to put the ball. It's very like high tech. It's a jugs machine, but with like all the new age technology you can imagine that could be put into a jugs machine. And so I assume that's where that number came from. So yeah, I mean, I think it was just sort of a good reminder, like, okay, this is what Chris Tyree is for Notre Dame right now. And I think he could be a problem for opposing defenses if he continues to expand his game and get more comfortable in that position. I've given a lot of my observations. Was there anything from practice today that really stood out to you that we haven't covered yet?
Not really. I mean, I was looking for surprises, and I found a couple, and we talked about Jeremiah Love. Not that I was expecting him not to be good. I just didn't expect him to be that much faster than everybody else. But I mean, I was trying to look all over the place. I also was looking at body language just to see how the guys were when they were going through their. Usually, I completely ignore the stretching or certainly try not to read too much into it. And I was watching it today with more enthusiasm and so forth. But
you wanted the Fred Hale scouting report.
I wanted the Fred Hale scouting report. I wish we could see more full practices. We're going to get to see a lot of just the stretching and the first 5 periods. We will get a lot of that. You don't get as much insightful things about that. They're really not competitive periods.
No, it's mostly like attendance.
Yeah.
And who's hurt.
So one thing we probably didn't touch on a lot was Sam Hartman's play. Mm-hmm. Again, I think as they get into, let's throw some deep bombs here, then we're going to see the Sam Hartman that was so spectacular at Wake Forest.
And I don't know that we mentioned, I think almost all the work that they did as an offense was red zone for 20 yards and in, so they weren't really stretching the field there. So obviously that can go a long way in helping the cornerbacks have a good day. So maybe that's played a role in them looking better than maybe some of us anticipated. But I do think that will translate to when they do some more stuff than what they were doing today. But I certainly think that opens up some opportunities for Sam Hartman and his abilities, no doubt.
Yeah, I was just trying to note who was on the depth chart at the offensive line, who was on the depth chart at the defensive line at the different positions. I guess I'm expecting Javonte Jean-Baptiste to eventually overcome the hyphenated guy in front of him, Nana Osafo-Mensah, in the battle of the hyphenated guys. But right now it seems pretty even with Nana maybe having a slight edge. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But gosh, I wish I could watch a whole full practice tomorrow. Because, again, they try to limit a little bit of what they're working on when we're in there. They don't want to show all their secrets.
Right. Yeah. That's why the first practice is good from their perspective to let us in, because it's not like they're going to be going through a lot of advanced stuff. It's a lot of basic stuff.
Right. Marcus Freeman mentioned in the press conference that, last year he was so amped up like the players were, that maybe they were just a little bit too amped up where they were almost injuring each other in practice. And he wanted to kind of emphasize, hey, look, this is a long road. Let's get the practice done, go 100 miles an hour. Don't worry about making mistakes, because we're going to make some mistakes. Don't injure your teammates.
Right.
And so I think he was talking to Jordan Botello specifically.
He probably made eye contact with him.
Anything easy, even when it's supposed to be a tap out of bounds, it's never quite that gingerly. So, but it was. I learned a lot today. I want to learn more about this team. Our next full practice that we get to see is when Notre Dame goes and holds it in the evening at local high school. They haven't picked out the high school yet, and that'll be in a couple weeks, Tyler?
Yeah, I think it's like not a little less than 2 weeks from now.
So we'll get to see a little bit more of the physicality. We'll get to see what the big uglies are doing for Tyler's dad and can report better on that. So, but today they were kind of just pushing each other around.
Since we're talking so much about practice, I thought this was a good question from We Are Not Marshall. Can you talk to the periods of a practice? Where does the meat of practice occur?
So what do they work on the most?
Yeah, I think you just sort of a general breakdown of how the periods sort of
okay, and they're not identical from one practice to the next, but usually you always have the stretching and the skipping and that kind of stuff, and then you do really basic drills by positions. So although today they started out with that ball security drill, but then
I think that's mostly special teams based, those first drills that they were doing, because the O-line and D-line usually goes their separate ways because they're not interested in special teams.
Right. And then you kind of work through a lot of position specific or offensive specific and defensive specific things. I mean, there's all kinds of things going. It's kind of like a circus. There's all kinds of things going on all at the same time, and you're trying to take it all in, and you have to kind of make decisions what you really want to watch. In general, as they get deeper into fall camp, they didn't get into scrimmage periods today other than that red zone work, and it wasn't really 11-on-11 contact kind of stuff. And so there, some more than others, you'll get that's what's really exciting, is watching the 11-on-11 contact periods. Right. There's some 7-on-7 periods. One thing we didn't see today that we usually see, they have a one-on-one drill with a defensive back and a wide receiver or a safety or a linebacker going against a tight end. Those are fun drills because you get to kind of see the speed and agility of those positions. And then they, take a knee at the end and tell us to get out.
Yeah, and they usually break up like those different 7-on-7 periods with more individual work or defense and offense specific work. And it's usually like informing like what they're going to do in that next drill. Like if they're going to work on goal line stuff, they'll break up, and each position group will work on things specific to what they need to do in goal line drills. And then they'll come back and work on that either in 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, just depending on the time of year, what practice we're talking about. There's usually like an inside run period. We saw a little bit of that today where they just do some running. You don't usually have receivers with that group. Sometimes there's 11-on-11 or 7-on-7 going on at the same time as an inside run period. So there's lots of just different kinds of ways to try to show every aspect. We didn't mention special teams. I think they started, like I mentioned, started with special teams. They broke up and did some punt work today in the middle of practice. There's usually sort of in the middle of practice, one or two special teams periods. And it's usually designed to like a specific unit. Like, so today was punt, and then there were some returners back there, but then there'll be another day where it's punt return specific, field goal specific, kickoff, etc. So that's sort of how things usually break down, at least from our experience watching Marcus Freeman's practices. And it's honestly not that significantly different than the practice sort of outline that occurred under Brian Kelly either.
I'm trying to remember, was it late in the Kelly era or early in the Marcus era where they did the chaos periods? Do you remember those where they'd be 12 on 11, or they had a beach ball once where they?
I think that was a Kelly thing. I don't think that was a Freeman. Freeman's like wrinkle was like early like competitive periods where they just like call out like to an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman to do a drill against each other, and then like whoever wins at the end, their team gets to watch the other team run some extra sprints or something like that.
Okay, we're going to move on to recruiting because, first of all, there's all kinds of recruits that are going to be on campus this week, beginning tomorrow with a big one. And then there was a couple of commitments over the weekend, kids from California that committed. So let's start with the 2024 commits that happened while you were on vacation that I covered.
That was a nice job by them. We worked that out. I said, hey, you guys take care of this while I'm gone. Make Eric do it.
You know what was really funny was with Villaasa, I had to be ready whether he was going to pick Notre Dame or not. And at the last minute, I said, you know what? I think he's going to Notre Dame. And then I kind of held my breath and he put the Notre Dame hat on. So that was
Kingston put the Notre Dame hat on, not you.
Yeah, that was the much better version of the story. Much better written story was that he's coming to Notre Dame.
Yeah, it was a nice shot in the arm for Notre Dame fans. Unfortunately, 48 hours later, you get the Matt Balis news. It's like, what the heck? Can't we have nice things around here?
Yeah.
But yeah, the Kingston Villaasa edition, I think, was huge. I think it was a very significant recruiting victory for Notre Dame to beat out both USC and Ohio State. USC being the hometown school, Ohio State being a school that had a strong pull to him with, in part, James Laurinaitis, who had been pulling him to Notre Dame prior to returning to his alma mater. It's a top-notch linebacker, 4 stars, but at the high end of a 4 stars right now on Rivals, he's ranked number 35 overall, the number 3 inside linebacker in the class, 6'3", 227 pounds. A kid that can do a lot from that linebacker position and is sort of the new age inside linebacker that you want to have on your team. He's dealt with a knee injury that took out a year of his high school career at St. John Bosco, but the sky is the limit, and it's kind of eerie, sort of the way he described being pulled to Notre Dame, and it a little bit similar to the way Manti Te'o felt like he was pulled to Notre Dame.
And those guys talk to each other too.
Very faith-based, yeah. And Kingston, I think, talked to a lot of Notre Dame linebackers. Jalen Smith was reaching out after he announced, and so yeah, I think there's a lot of things that went in Notre Dame's favor to win out that recruitment, but it was certainly not an easy recruitment to win, and one that I think even a couple of weeks ago people thought that Notre Dame might lose. So for Notre Dame to get that victory, which they needed to sort of push to the end, I don't think Kingston knew what he was doing. A lot of times when kids set commitment dates, they already have a decision in mind.
Yeah, he said the day before he made up his mind.
Yeah, he was not for certain what he was going to do, which from my perspective, I would advise the kids to not do that. Like, hey, like you don't have to decide now. There's no one's forcing you to do this, but it worked in Notre Dame's favor this time. So that was a very significant recruiting victory for the Irish, and one that I know that the Irish coaching staff is very fired up about.
Yeah, and it from a perception standpoint too, because there was, the disappointment over Justin Scott picking Ohio State over Notre Dame and others, and people were like, "Boy, where's the recruiting momentum?" And then they get, the highest for the third year in a row. Really, they've got a top 50 player and a linebacker. They had Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed in the classes before, so they're on a nice run with linebackers 3 years in a row.
Yeah, and the other addition was Logan Sadat, an Oregon State commitment that a former Oregon State commitment that Notre Dame flipped. He was publicly committed to Oregon State until the moment he announced his commitment to Notre Dame. Was someone that was totally off my radar until we caught wind of it before he ended up announcing. But a 3-star wide receiver, 5'10", 185 pounds, out of Salinas, California, Palma High School. Had 49 catches for 827 yards and 12 touchdowns. Eric, since you were the one covering him, I'm curious what you think of him and maybe what you think of him as being sort of Notre Dame's answer to losing Isaiah Canyon in the 2024 recruiting class.
Well, he's a very different receiver from Isaiah Canyon.
Yep.
Isaiah is 6'3" and lanky, and Sadat is, a slot receiver kind of type, 5'11"-ish, 175, 180 pounds. There would have been cycles where I would have kind of questioned going after this guy because I think there's a little risk here. And yet I think he's perfect for this class, given you've already got 2 big receivers in the class, and Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert. You don't really have a lot of slot receiver body types. And I just like the way that this kid's background and makeup is. I mean, he plays for a coach that's been around for 24 years, coaching that school. Palma, they've had players go to the pros. His brother is an All-American wrestler. He's a junior at Michigan State, made the NCAA wrestling tournament and was in the final 12 in his weight class. And Logan was also a wrestler, so he's got that strong upper body, and he can, they're kind of a more run-oriented offense, and he's a good blocker. And he's got track speed. I mean, this is a guy that would have been recruited for Division I long jumping had he said, yeah, that's what I'd like to do in college.
Yeah, that's his passion, right?
But he's got, 10.82 speed in the 100. He's a fast 200 guy. And so I think, this is the kind of guy, if you're going to take a flyer on somebody and develop them, this is the kind of player. So I thought it was a good pickup. I like the pickup there.
So I'm not great with the track times, but I do remember, I try to make comparisons. I think I seem to recall, if my memory is serving me, Brandon Wimbush was a 10.8 track guy, and Brandon Wimbush was fast, not just fast for a quarterback, but fast in general. So I think that I think it's helpful to sort of remind people, if you're not of a track mind, because I don't know that a lot of people are that what does 10.8 mean?
Right.
But 10.8 is good.
Right. So. Yeah, I used to cover high school track, so those times and distances jump out at me. I mean, a 24-foot long jump, which was his best. He was second in California in the long jump. He was under 24 in the state finals. But a 24-foot long jump is pretty impressive for a high school kid, especially a junior. His times and his distances will be better next year when he's a senior. He is not going to be an early enrollee. His high school is not into letting them do that. And so he will be running track, I'm sure, for his track team next spring.
And there's certainly value in that as it relates to when he gets to Notre Dame's campus.
Right. So we have a question, Tyler, it looks like, on recruiting.
Yeah. We are not Marshall, who is getting the MVP award for questions. Asking, how do you both feel on the chances of flipping Justin Scott?
Well, we have somebody on our message board that has set the odds at 99-1. It was 100-1. And then I showed him a screenshot of Justin Scott liking and retweeting a story about Eric Hansen weighs in on Notre Dame trying to flip Justin Scott. He liked the story and he retweeted it. So, so then he lowered it from 100 to 99-1. But I would say I would not count on it. I think the odds are certainly stacked against Notre Dame. I don't know that they're 99-1, but I think he's open-minded. This was a kid that basically either silently committed or came close to silently committing to every school that he visited. So he he went to Notre Dame. Okay, I'm hinted to the coaches, I'm coming to Notre Dame, Miami, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State. And really going into those summer visits, the vibe we got from people close to him was that Ohio State and Michigan really weren't in it. I mean, really weren't serious players. And really, if you rank them, those are 1 and 2 on decision day. Notre Dame was 3. But I think that there are a lot of people that will talk to. I think it's going to be hard for Georgia and Miami to get back into it because I think distance is a real factor.
Yeah.
And what Justin said publicly was that Larry Johnson, as Ohio State's defensive line coach, has put a ton of people in the NFL, and that impresses him. Al Washington, not so many guys. But if Notre Dame's defensive line becomes a surprise position, if Notre Dame's defense is impressive, this is the kind of recruitment that splitting hairs could open the door. And again, I'm not predicting a flip, but I'm saying I think if Notre Dame plays well early in the season, it could make him at least ponder that.
Yeah, and I don't remember when I discussed it. I think it was with Charleston, or it was on the message board. It was someone asked, "It's like, should Notre Dame host Justin Scott for a visit, given that he's recruited or committed to Ohio State? If he wants to come to the Ohio State Notre Dame game, do you let him come? Given that you could be worried that he may be maybe recruiting for Ohio State, or just wants a free ticket to go see his future team play at Ohio State." But I'm of the opinion that you'd get him to come here, because then what if you beat Ohio State and he sees what Notre Dame can do against the Buckeyes? What do you think about that?
I agree. I agree. I mean, I don't think he's going to be going up to Kingston and saying, "Hey, come join us in Columbus."
Right.
I think he would just be respectful, and he's still, from what I understand, he's still talking to the recruits in the Notre Dame class. The other thing that's ticklish about that is Notre Dame has a policy that they will not let somebody that's verbally committed somewhere else come on an official visit. Well, with Justin, they really don't have to. They can have him on an unofficial visit,
right?
Since he can just make the 90-mile drive from Chicago. And we should point out that Logan Sadat never visited Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
His family was good with, we know what Notre Dame's about. We're okay with committing with not having been there. He is going to visit in September, take an official visit as a committed recruit.
Yeah, and it's not as if Justin Scott is unfamiliar with Notre Dame's campus. So even if he didn't come for another visit, it wouldn't mean it would be impossible for Notre Dame to flip him. Although I think I would like Notre Dame's chances a whole lot better if they do get him on campus again.
Absolutely.
To remind him of what they have to offer for him. The last thing recruiting-wise that we hinted at but haven't gotten into specifically is the 2025 recruits that Notre Dame is planning to host this week. Tomorrow, as you had mentioned on Thursday, Deuce Knight, the top dual-threat quarterback in the 2025 class, according to Rivals, is planning to visit Notre Dame. Charleston Bowles and I interviewed him on the Inside Indy Sports podcast earlier this month. If you missed that, I would encourage you to listen to that. We talked a lot about Notre Dame, a little bit about Tennessee. Those are his top 2 schools at the moment. He's not in a hurry to commit, according to him, but I think if he felt comfortable with Notre Dame or Tennessee, I think he would be ready to commit. I think he's just sort of looking for the right moment and the right feel for what he wants to do. So that's a big visit for Notre Dame. He's sort of the number one priority at the position for the Irish, and we'll see how they feel about him coming out of that visit. I think that'll go a long way in dictating sort of what they do next. So they're not sitting on their hands. They recently offered Bear Bachmeier to give them another option at the quarterback position, and he wants to get to campus as well. And then this weekend on Sunday, Notre Dame is planning to have, I think they're calling it a grill and chill event, sort of a barbecue outing, unofficial visits for guys in the 2025 class. I think there's, I don't know, more than 15 guys. I'm counting with my eyes here without actually counting, that we keep confirming with names on the Insider Lounge. Some of the more important ones, in my opinion, are Daniel Anderson, Owen Strebig, Justin Thurman. Thurman and Strebig are guys that I have put in Rivals Future Cast for Notre Dame, so maybe they get to campus and they like what they see again, and maybe they want to make an early decision. I'm not necessarily predicting that's what happens. I think Strebe is maybe closer to a commitment decision than Justin Thurman is. But those guys will be on campus. Davion Dixon, a 2025 commit, is planning to get on campus, and he just recently got a Miami offer, and he's from the Miami area, so that is worth noting. Rowan Byrne is someone on the offensive line that's very interested in the Irish. He plans to get back on campus. So a lot of notable names that we are continuing to report on the Insider Lounge. So if you are not a subscriber, we would encourage you to do so to keep you up to date on the latest information. Go to InsideNDSports.com and check out the subscription options. We'll also be running some specials later into August to try to convince you to sign up for a subscription. If we haven't done so yet, we've put a lot of different deals out there in the off season, and some of you may still be on a free trial basis with us currently, but I think we're going to have a lot of coverage that you're going to like leading up to the season and throughout the season as well.
Right. I'll also note in the Grill and Chill, some of the 2024 recruits are going to come to help recruit the 2025s, including quarterback CJ Carr.
Yeah, Notre Dame's Midwestern commits have done a really good job of getting back on campus to help recruit guys, whether it's Cam Williams and Aeneas Williams. Those guys are regular visitors. If you go to their rivals' profiles and you look at the visit dates that are collected on, they're 10 deep at least with some of those guys. So they're regulars here, and I imagine they'll be at most, if not all, the home games for the Irish this upcoming season, as long as their high school football schedule allows them to do so.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for tonight, unless you have some final thoughts there, Tyler.
I don't think so. I appreciate everyone for tuning in. We are back to – we will be weekly. Football Never Sleeps, at least during the preseason camp portion of the schedule, will not necessarily be on a set date. We'll probably adjust that around Notre Dame's schedule. But like Eric mentioned at the top of the show, when we get into the season following games, we plan to be on Monday nights to offer a recap of the previous game, and then looking a little bit ahead to the upcoming opponent. So we hope you stick with us for all that. We got plenty of stuff to talk about. InsideNDSports.com for all our print coverage. The Inside ND Sports podcast. We'll plan to record a podcast later this week. We'll plan to be having a podcast and a Football Never Sleeps, each one of those every week moving forward through pretty much the end of the year. So it is time to get busy, and we appreciate all the support. Like the video, comment, subscribe, all those things help us get in front of more eyeballs, and let you help us share our beautiful voices with everyone who needs to hear it. So we thank you guys once again.
And my rival's 5-star golden ball back in the background.
I have mine over here, but my shoulder's too big for you to see it. So I need to figure out a better way to display it, but I appreciate Josh Helmholtz for sending that to us. And
mine will be there until one of my grandsons sees it, then it'll be gone.
Yeah, it'll have grass stains on it sooner rather than later. All right, well, we appreciate you tuning in, and we will be up bright and early the rest of the week checking out some more practices. So make sure you're on InsideNDSports.com for more coverage of practices and interviews with players and coaches. Good night.
Good night.